Welcome to the show. It's Halloween, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about these safety issues like trick-or-treating and asking the question, are sex offenders working in haunted house attractions? Let's begin with the trick-or-treating. Now, there's a reason why I hate trick-or-treaters, and that's basically because no kids are wearing reflective vests. And that's a big safety issue. So I'm going to present to you with some trick-or-treating safety tips. For this year. The example is from the Kentucky State Police officers, and from Halloween Safety National Safety Council. So let's look for motorists. You need to stay alert, increase pedestrian and bicycle traffic on Halloween evening. Be patient and slow down. Give children lots of time to cross the street. Costumes may impair their ability to see and hear you. Drive defensively. Don't assume pedestrian will move in a particular manner. Expect the unexpected. Be extra cautious in areas and vehicles. For parents and caregivers, trick-or-treaters should always carry flashlights or glow sticks. Dress children in costumes that are light-colored and clearly visible to motorists. Consider traffic safety vests, which may be found in most agriculture-type business. Costumes should be no longer than the ankle length, preventing tripping, entanglement, or contact with the flame. Use face paints or makeup rather than masks that could impair that vision. Do not permit children to bicycle, rollerblade, or skateboard while wearing a costume. As for trick-or-treaters, don't assume they're right of way when crossing the street. Motorists may have trouble seeing you. Just because one car stops doesn't mean they all will. Be very cautious of strangers. Never enter a stranger's house or vehicle. Stay on well-lit streets and always use the sidewalk. Never cut across yards or use alleys. Look left, right, and left again. And for homeowners, turn on your porch light. Eliminate tripping hazards. Remove wet leaves from steps and sidewalk. Use battery-powered jack-o'-lanterns. Do not overload electrical outlets on extension cords with lighting or special effects. That's from the Kentucky. That's just from It's for Halloween safety. All costumes, wigs, accessories should be fire resistant. If children are allowed after dark, fasten reflective tape to their costumes and bags or get them glow sticks. Opt for non-toxic Halloween makeup over masks, which could obscure their vision. Always test makeup in a small area first to see if any irritation develops. Remove all makeup before children go to bed to prevent skin and eye irritation. And when they're on the prowl, a responsible adult should accompany young children on the neighborhood rounds. If your older children are going alone, plan a review route acceptable to you. Agree on specific time children should return home. Teach your children to never enter a stranger's home or car. Instruct children to travel only in familiar well-lit areas and stick with their friends. Tell your children not to eat any treats until they return home and take care to avoid any food allergies. So that's the safety tips. Now here's the question. Now imagine this. You're in a haunted house and all of a sudden someone comes in there and takes advantage of you as a woman. But the question is, are sex offenders working in these haunted house attractions? The answer seems obvious until you look at the facts behind what's going on in these haunted houses. Here's Lisa Guerrero.
Every Halloween, haunted houses are a popular attraction across the USA. People flock to them just to be terrified. Odds are you've never thought about the live actors who provide all those thrills and chills. They're generally unrecognizable behind all that heavy monster makeup. But an Inside Edition investigation has found that some of them are monsters in real life.
He's there, hiding under makeup in the dark in a costume.
Kim Neubauer says she discovered her coworker at this haunted house in Columbia Station, Ohio, was a registered sex offender who raped 2 kids.
It's very scary to have people like that working around children in the dark.
She says he and 2 other convicted sex offenders worked at the haunted house. They were recently fired, the owner told us. Our investigation discovered all these convicted sexual predators working with kids at haunted houses across the country. Just look at this mugshot. He's still in his Halloween makeup. In California, this man went by the name Trickster the Clown. He worked at a haunted house for years, but in June he was convicted of running a sex ring and raping 18 women and girls. He's been sentenced to 200 years behind bars.
We're going to hear more from the rest of these sex offenders as the investigation continues when we come back. Then a bit later on, the love swindle scam. We're going to explain to you what that means and how you can avoid it. Stay with us. Returning now to our story, you've heard about you've heard most of these men who have been arrested for these predators who have been arrested for their acts in kids in these for their acts against kids in these haunted houses. But there's more. There's a twist to this story. Once again, here's Lisa Guerrero with our Inside Edition investigation.
I am here with the Bloodshed Brothers, and
He was hired by the self-proclaimed Bloodshed Brothers to creep the halls and scare guests at their hit haunted house, Field of Screams, outside LA. Their real names are Zach and Jeremy Ball. Bree Drumright worked at the Bloodshed Brothers attraction in high school and says Zach Ball led her into an empty room at the haunted house to make out.
I was 14. It still hurts. I wish I could get the closure, but it still hurts.
Maddie Estrada also worked with the Bloodshed Brothers.
They would bring coolers of alcohol, and they would make sure it was like sweet stuff, like Mike's Hard Lemonade, or, like fruity things that would be, yummy for kids.
At just 16 years old, she says Zach Ball pressured her into a sexual relationship. He was 24. Is this man a predator?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was a kid. And just having this abusive man be the only person that I could rely on for advice or comfort, and he didn't even give that to me.
Jeremy Ball was never charged, but Zach Ball pled guilty to sexually abusing a minor and now has to register as a sex offender. He was released after just 1 day in jail.
It's such a slap in the face to me and all of the other victims.
We caught up with him.
Hi, Zach. I'm Lisa Guerrero with Inside Edition. Did you coerce a 16-year-old girl that was working for you into a sexual relationship? She says that you're a predator and a monster and you belong behind bars. What's your comment, sir?
He didn't want to talk. So word of caution, enjoy your favorite haunted house this Halloween. Just be careful who's lurking in the dark.
And always teach your kids never to talk to strangers. Now, when you're carving a pumpkin, it's best to know about safety. So the question is, how can you carve a pumpkin without getting hurt? Take a look.
Yikes, it's that time of year.
Ow!
When people cut themselves carving pumpkins.
First you go in.
This woman ended up in urgent care.
I took a knife and I went, hi-ya. and I took my finger off the knife and it literally squirted blood.
The Halloween tradition is responsible for nearly 2,000 injuries each year. We asked Dr. Doretti Fufa, a top hand surgeon at the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, for tips on how to stay safe. She says you should avoid this kind of grip.
We want to decrease the chance that the hand could slide down the blade and get injured that way.
Try a carving kit like this that's especially designed for pumpkins. Use a sawing, not a stabbing motion, and never cut toward your hand.
Instead, place your hand on top of the pumpkin and make sure that you're cutting away from your hand, never towards your hand.
Another important tip, never put your hand inside the pumpkin when carving.
What we can do instead is replace the top of the pumpkin, and then this hand can instead be on the outside of the pumpkin.
Good advice to avoid a pumpkin carving nightmare.
Ow!
Ooh, wow. So next time you're gonna think about carving, using the pumpkin to carve a jack-o'-lantern, or if you plan on using that pumpkin to eat, I'm gonna give you some ideas. Here are some pumpkin ideas from Mr. Chef Emile Lagasse. Take a look, and we'll take a break.
You're gonna love this. Oh, wait, I'm ready. I took one of those small or medium-sized pumpkins and wedged it. Took the seeds out, and basically, like you're gonna do with broccoli, you blanch it in water so that it's fork tender. Okay, not rocket science. Just nice piece of pumpkin. Let it cool, fork tender, nice piece of pumpkin. You can let your imagination go wild right now. Simple vegetable, full of vitamins, fun. You can just dice it up with butter and have buttered pumpkin as a vegetable. You could add brown sugar, have caramelized pumpkin. Great with pork chops. It's a pork fat thing, what can I say? You just let it go on. You can put it in a pot with butter, little cream, mash it, mashed pumpkin. You can mix it with potato. Just let your mind go crazy. Or, I was saying earlier, you got a lot of pumpkins like this, do this, and then you can use that zip bag thing, and then you can put it in the freezer. Then come January or whatever, when you get the urge for pumpkin, you got some pumpkin.
An example like this would be pumpkin bread, a pumpkin tambour, pumpkin grits, pumpkin creme brulee, pumpkin and sweet corn fritters, a pumpkin cheesecake, pumpkin and sage soup, pumpkin risotto with duck, acorn squash and pumpkin soup, Wegmeier pumpkin soup. Those are just some examples. Unless you want to try some pumpkin. You ever heard of the love swindle scam? It's when younger women take advantage of older men, the senior citizens. Coming up next, I'm going to share with you an investigation that I saw and just had to be a give me a break moment. We'll tell you about the love swindle scam, how it works. I'm not going to play you the whole thing as a 40 minutes. I'm going to play you a portion of how it went on. It's an example that you must see. Stay with us. You ever heard of the love swindle? Or the sweetheart scams? It's to where younger women are taking advantage of older men, robbing them of, like they say, oh, we're your guardian, we know your mother, this, we know your care, this and this. They don't, not only that, you know what else they do? Take your money. I saw a Dateline episode 2 times, and I just had to see it again because this is actually very similar to how this all goes. So the question is, how does it work? Here's Chris Hansen.
In a 6-month Dateline investigation, we got a startling and detailed look at how experts and victims say the sweetheart swindle works. It's a highly organized scheme, and we're going to show you step by step, beginning with a chance encounter. It had only been 3 weeks since 78-year-old Sam Kaplan lost his wife Beverly when Lisa Loio approached Sam and told him,
Actually, that was an error. It's a sweetheart swindle, not the love swindle. This is from the Phoenix police on these sweetheart scams. These are like gypsy scams, taking your money and stuff. So let's continue watching.
she'd been his wife's nurse.
She went to a fruit market parking lot,
Calls you by name?
yes.
She says, I was Beverly's nurse. How is she? You reveal that Beverly has died? It's almost as if these people were stalking you.
They must have been stalking me, having found out my name and maybe where I live.
These chance encounters, it turns out, sometimes start with a little research.
They will actually follow the person, see where he lives, see what kind of car he drives, to do what's called a little background on the subject.
It's possible this obituary provided all the background Lisa Loio needed to make Sam believe her. According to John Nicholas, it's the first step in a master plan.
And then they will try to set up a proper meeting, a chance meeting, if you will.
So to make it look like
It was a chance
they just
meeting.
happened into him.
Exactly.
And when all along, this thing has been scripted like a Broadway show.
Exactly right.
It's no coincidence that most elderly victims of financial abuse are frail, widowed, and lonely. And that's because the women pick their victims wisely. Authorities point to 85-year-old Gabriel Muhek. He was financially well off before he collapsed in a shopping center parking lot and was helped by this woman, Dorothy Miller. She is a member of another large gypsy family. Court documents allege that in a matter of 5 months, she ended up with $277,000 of his money and a new house. But she insists he wants her to have it all because she cares for him.
Do you have any understanding?
But when concerned family members took him to police, look what happened.
Do you remember putting Dorothy on any of your bank accounts?
At times, he didn't remember.
No, I don't remember.
Minutes later, he gave a different answer to the same question.
That Dorothy Miller was put on this home savings account.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I told him to put it there.
And when he is pressed, he's adamant that he gave her the money willingly. And he says she deserves
Does
it.
that bother you that her name is on an account that's got $50,000 in it?
What am I gonna do with it? She helped me, damn it.
Okay.
And that's why I'm still here.
A doctor says Gabe shows symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And the videotape clearly shows one of the reasons why prosecutors are not pursuing criminal charges against Dorothy Miller. The very things that make Gabe a good victim make him a bad witness. And why is it so hard to stop them? Because they put it on paper.
Go out to the sunshine.
Remember Harry? If it weren't for a caring and determined neighbor, he would have lost everything.
Would you like to get outside?
Sylvia Tierney was Harry's conservator, and she quickly discovered that the Loios had positioned themselves well.
One day I found out that they had gotten onto the deed to his house. The next day I found out that he had taken out a second mortgage on his house. Then I had discovered that the car was missing.
Sylvia found that Venus was on the title to Harry's car as well as the deed to his house. And it didn't end there. Harry's house had been put on the market for $219,000 without his knowledge and with Venus and her brother on the deed. If the house had sold, the Loio family would have scored big. When Harry was hospitalized after having a stroke, members of the Loio family came by to check on Harry and the property. This time it wasn't Venus who came calling, but her sister Bonnie and sister-in-law Lisa.
Lisa and Bonnie came to my door wanted to know where Harry was, and they also became quite concerned with how the mortgage was being paid and who was going to pay the property taxes.
Why were they so concerned?
Because they stood to inherit everything. Their names were on the deed of the property, and they had written out a will.
So they're on Harry's will?
Yes.
Not just Venus, but her relative.
Right. They were looking out for their assets. Right. And I wasn't going to let them get it. And I didn't.
She didn't. But eventually, Harry's house had to be sold to pay for his care. And just last month, Harry died in a nursing home. You may be asking yourself, how do they get the elderly men to sign all those documents? In Harry's case, Sylvia says he was duped into signing a deed, thinking it was paperwork for a loan. But in other cases, victims said they got them to do it with the promise. You remember Bonnie. She and Lisa were checking on Harry's property. Like her sisters, Bonnie has several aliases: Bonnie Ray, Bonnie Pay, Bonnie John, and Pat Mitlow. And she used what appears to be a familiar Loio family tactic. Bonnie promised to care for 77-year-old Leo Kesty for the rest of his life, in return for his house. But when family members found him feeble and unkempt, with most of his personal possessions missing from his home, they sued, and his conservator took the unusual step of chaining down his television to prevent it from being taken. This is one case where the Loios lost. It went to civil court, which almost never happens, and the court ordered Bonnie Loio to return the house and repay thousands. Even now, she still owes the money. Because of that, you may be wondering why these cases aren't prosecuted criminally. The answer is they almost never are, because it's hard to prove the women obtained the money under false pretenses, and because typically the men were so willing to give. Why were they so willing? Maybe because of the promise. And the promise can pay off, like it did for Anna Loio, the matriarch of the Loio family. Anna owns 5 acres of valuable California real estate just 64 miles outside of Lake Tahoe, Nevada. It once belonged to an 85-year-old man who had purchased the property as a retirement investment, but a lawsuit alleges he signed it over to Anna because she made a promise of lifetime care. In the end, he sued for breach of contract, but died in a nursing home before he could get Anna off the deed. Anna's lawyer said Anna did assist him with his needs and confirmed she prevailed in keeping the property.
It's a mere fact that if the female is tutored enough to know what to look for, how to spot, and then how to proceed with a sweetheart swindle, again, all it is time, and usually the payoff is big.
And take a look at where Anna lives now. This spacious 3-bedroom home featuring a sculpture garden and pool in the backyard. And how'd she get it? 14 years ago, she promised this 81-year-old man lifetime care as well. He sold his home and bought this house for the two to share. According to a petition filed by the Public Guardian's Office, he fled because he was being mistreated. Even though Anna said she would care for him if he came back, he died in a nursing home. Once again, Anna got it on paper and kept it on paper. When he died, her name was on the deed. The house would be hers. It's this same house in Sacramento that serves as a home base for the Loios. And it was here that we saw Venus casually strolling with children, Lisa showing up for a visit, Bonnie outside with more children, and Anna, the matriarch, out front wearing a bathrobe. It appears to be a good life for the Loios. The promise works, experts say, because the carefully selected victims are in need of care and friendship, which is what this man, Tony Bruschka, thought he had in Venus Loio, a friend. Tony had already given Venus $118,000 when she said she needed emergency surgery. It wasn't long before she wanted more, and that's when Tony says she applied the pressure.
Said she was done. She got dizzy. She was falling. And they had to have $73,000 for the second operation. The last thing they said was, do you want to see the blood? Once they said, you want to see the blood, I just ran out of the apartment right to the stock exchange. and sold all my stock.
So like Harry and Chuck, Tony found a way to provide Venus with the money she pressured him to give. $73,000. He didn't even stop to think about it.
Maybe when you get older, you don't think of all those things, you know. You think of somebody's in trouble, you want to help them. But I never dreamed she would take all of it.
Venus promised to pay Tony back. She even signed this promissory note. But Tony says a year passed without any word or any money from Venus. Tony became angry and says he told this man, who he believed was Venus's brother, that he was going to the authorities.
I accused Steve of using her as bait so they can work these scams on senior citizens.
According to Tony, that's when things got worse. And this time he says it was Steve who was applying the pressure. Steve was really Venus's husband, not her brother. Their marriage linked the two gypsy families. And it was Steve and his mother, Tony says, who visited him with a disturbing story, that Venus had fled, and if he took legal action, she would never see her children again.
And they would bring the kids up also. And the kids said, "Are you going to arrest my mom?"
The pressure is why Tony says he signed off on the loan.
They're going to pay me $20,000, no interest. And if I died, the promissory note would be canceled out.
But they owed you some $250,000.
That's right. The reason I signed that was because of the threat.
Just 3.5 months later, Dateline's hidden cameras captured the very same family on videotape as they appeared to be targeting an elderly gentleman. But what they didn't know is that he was working for us.
So, when we come back, an example of how it's going. Stay with us. If you're just joining us, tonight we're talking about the sweetheart swindle. Basically what it means is younger women are taking advantage of older men. Meaning they want to be friends with the older men, and they want to take their money. We showed you how the scheme works. Now, it's time to go undercover to find out how this works. Once again, here's Chris Hansen.
They will try to befriend one, target one if you will, trying to develop it into a relationship where their ultimate aim is to gain monies and or property.
So we set up a controlled experiment to see what would happen. We asked a 78-year-old man named George to help us out. We gave him a history, a lonely widower with time on his hands and money to spend. And we sent him into this flower shop in Hayward, California. The shop is owned by Steve, the same Steve that Tony Bruschka says put the pressure on him. He met a young woman at the shop who told George her name is Rosie Perry, but when she and her cousin were arrested in May of 1995 in connection with the sweetheart swindle, she told police her name was Rosie Yanko. Her cousin was convicted of grand theft, but charges against Rosie were dropped. Rosie is Steve's sister, and Diana is their mother. She was friendly and invited George to visit again anytime he wanted to talk. He played along, as any lonely elderly man might do. He went to the flower shop often. He had lunch in the back of the shop. Rosie gave George flowers, hugs, and when they went out to a restaurant, the hard luck story of her life.
I have relatives and stuff. I go visit them. But I'm not to live with them. I'm not going to give them no problems. You know, they got nothing their own.
Yeah. Well,
I want someone to be happy with.
She told George about medical bills she needed to pay and a fiancé killed in a boating accident.
I'm over it now. It's been 4 years.
The next day, Rosie told George all she wanted was a companion, and a May-December relationship didn't concern her at all.
Don't bother me. If it did, I remember you said it. I'm happy to be with you. I'm not embarrassed or anything. I'm happy. Because there's nothing to be embarrassed about.
I'm not embarrassed.
It's official.
She was telling George that they were a couple. She even talked about going to Hawaii with him.
When you're ready to go to Hawaii?
You want to go to Hawaii too?
Of course.
And she told him she'd love to visit him in New York, where he said he lived.
I want to go shopping in New York. I want to eat in New York. I want to eat my heart out in New York.
So we decided to pick up the tab, and not just for Rosie. She told George she wanted her Aunt Diana to come along. But as you've seen, Diana is really Rosie's mom.
As I understand it, you wanted open booking, right?
Rosie told George to buy open ticket, saying she and Diana needed to be flexible. So we went along with it, but we wondered if there was another reason why someone would want open tickets. As you'll see later, there was. We also arranged for them to stay and visit with George in this New York City hotel, because we didn't want to ask George to use his home.
How are you?
Rosie and Diana left their room and had breakfast with George in his suite. Just 15 minutes into her visit, Rosie was giddy about her prospects in the big city.
When are you going to change? When are you going to come?
As soon as I find an apartment.
Yeah? Oh, she's back. You're all ready.
I'll start looking for an apartment today.
And that's not all. Rosie said she saw a perfect spot for her own flower shop, right in the heart of Manhattan.
Coming here, she's looking out the car window and she's looking, and there was a store for rent. And then she goes, that would make a great shop. And I'm just looking at her, what's wrong with her?
Is that a big front window? And then you can, decorate it real pretty.
And later that day, Rosie, who had been out only twice before with George, was bold enough to ask him to rent an apartment for her.
Or you find an apartment to rent it for?
So, if I found an apartment, rent it for you?
It sounded like an offer many lonely elderly men would find hard to resist. A 26-year-old woman implying that she was ready to move across the country to be with George and take care of him.
If I find an apartment, I'll welcome you, I'll cook for you, I'll do everything. But you don't offer me. I don't mind doing it. I'm not saying don't do it yourself. I'm not trying to say liberate it for me.
But later that night over dinner, George told Rosie he wasn't feeling well, and we decided to cut the visit short because in reality, we weren't going to bankroll Rosie's plans. Watch what happens the next morning when Diana turned up the heat.
I said, how was your dinner? She says, it was lovely. And then boom, start pouring out tears. Straight to the bathroom. So she came out, she laid on the bed and she wouldn't stop crying.
Diana told George Rosie didn't want him to leave.
And evidently she found herself with a crush. And I don't think she doesn't know how to handle it.
And later, Rosie confesses her true feelings to George.
I'll put it to you straight,
Then Rosie cried as she told George she didn't want him to go.
of course you don't like to see it.
But Rosie, as you may have guessed, could be crying crocodile tears. Maybe she's upset that the trip might be ending for the other people who were staying on our dime. Other people Rosie didn't tell George about.
So how was your trip?
Listen as George asks Rosie about her flight from California. She told him she sat next to a stranger on the plane.
There was someone sitting next to us. In the seats, because there was like seatings, there was a stranger sitting next to us.
But Rosie was telling a lie. The man sitting next to her was no stranger. In fact, Dateline watched him leave California for New York with Rosie and Diana. He even stayed in their hotel room. The man who was with them was Steve. That's right, the same Steve who was married to Venus, the one who Tony Bruschka says put the pressure on him. But apparently Diana didn't want George to know that a man was with them, because she later gave Rosie instructions about what to say to George, and she spoke in the gypsy language of Romany, so he couldn't understand her. We asked Detective John Nicholas to translate for us.
She said in Gypsy Romany, "Don't think that there was a man with me. Tell him quietly." And then the young lady asked, what do you want me to tell him? And then she repeated, "Tell him that there was no one with me."
And Steve wasn't the only guest George didn't know he had. This woman met up with them at the airport in New York, and she also stayed in the room. 4 people in a room George had reserved for 2. And it turns out they pulled a fast one on George regarding the airline tickets as well. Remember, they specifically requested open tickets. Well, open tickets are expensive because you can change them or get a refund. And that's exactly what Rosie and Diana did. They got a refund for the tickets George sent them and traveled on cheaper tickets. They made nearly $3,000 on the switch. Possibly because George started asking questions, Rosie eventually admitted that they took the tickets to the airline for a refund. But Rosie lied again when she told George she'd accidentally left the refund checks at home.
I'm so excited. I left them on the dresser. I'm packing my stuff. Didn't even fold them.
At home on the dresser? Not a chance. This letter from the airline confirms that the tickets George bought were presented for a refund at the airport on August 14th, the same day Rosie, Diana, and Steve traveled to New York. Apparently, $3,000 wasn't enough for Rosie, because before George left New York, she reminded him of how strapped she was for cash.
Does it have enough room just go back home? Yeah.
And Diana wanted to make sure that George would pay for the hotel. She called him on the phone and sounded as if she was crying, telling George, "I'm so pressured, I don't know what we're going to do." But just a few hours after that phone call, Diana and Rosie looked like big spenders.
I should have that bracelet.
We wondered if our $2,800 was burning a hole in their pockets as they danced their way through the Diamond District. And when Rosie and company left New York, they had a lot more with them than when they arrived. And despite the fact she promised to send George the money, so far George hasn't received a penny. We decided it was time to pay Rosie a visit. We caught up with her in front of the flower shop.
And Chris Hansen will confront Rosie and the other suspects in this scam when we come back. Hold on to your seats. This sweetheart swindle is gonna be a bumpy ride as Chris Hansen confronts two of the suspects involved in this sweetheart swindle. Now, for those who don't know what it is, if you just joined us, we are talking about the sweetheart swindle. It works as younger women are taking advantage of senior citizens, meaning taking away their money. But first, they have to friend the person. Then, they take the money.
Where she first met George.
Hi, Rosie. Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC. How are you today?
Not too good.
Do you remember George? Do you remember George?
No.
The man you went to go visit in New York?
No.
Let me just show you this videotape. Is that you?
Yeah.
Okay. Who is that woman with you?
That's my aunt.
Your aunt? What's her name?
Well, that's none of your business.
We asked Rosie if she told George the truth.
I did not lie to him.
You told him that you had traded in some airline tickets and that you left the money on the dresser.
I told him that, and I had sent it to him. But someone stole it.
Somebody stole it. Well, we have evidence here that you traded in the tickets and made $2,800.
Would you stop following me?
Well, I just want to get your side of the story here.
Well, that's none of your business, okay?
Rosie, members of your family have been accused of taking advantage of elderly men.
Would you go away from me?
Rosie hurried off and went to a payphone down the street. A few moments later, Steve arrived to pick her up. We tried to talk to Steve, but he sped away. And we had some questions for the Loio women, too. We wanted to ask about some of the elderly gentlemen in their past. We went to the Loio family home in Sacramento, where we caught up with Anna, the matriarch of the Loio family.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dateline NBC. Why is it that you, two of your daughters, and a daughter-in-law are all named in suits alleging that you've taken advantage of elderly men?
Oh, come on now. Get away from me. Don't start that.
What do you mean, don't start that? What's going on? Why are you and your daughters named in
of
suits?
what? Of what?
Well, like
Of
this
what?
man, Harry Champion. Do you know him?
Oh, get out of here. That's
know
my
him?
son-in-law. That's the liar right there.
What do you
That's the Dimitro family, the liar.
The Dimitro family, one of your daughter's aliases is Dimitro.
Please.
Why all the aliases,
Talk to my
Anna?
lawyer. Talk to my lawyer.
Can we talk to you for a minute?
Anna refused, and we left. but we still hadn't spoken with Venus, Bonnie, or Lisa. So we went to another house where Loio family members have been seen. And look who shows up. An elderly man on a bicycle. Naturally, we were curious, so we stopped and asked him some questions. His name is Luis Del Moro, and he's 78 years old. And guess what? He knows Bonnie Loio too. She stopped him when he was riding his bike one day. It was a story we had heard before.
She stopped the car and told me that she knew me.
Had you ever seen her before that time?
No, not that I know of.
She's living.
And it turns out Del Moro says he's given Bonnie money for medical expenses. The last time she came by, he said he didn't give her any.
I figured that maybe I was giving somebody money that I needed myself.
What will happen to Luis Del Moro, we don't know. But we do know that the Sweetheart Swindle has left a trail of men much like him, broke and brokenhearted.
So how can you avoid something like this? First, contact your local police department and ask them if they have a senior citizens abuse hotline. If they don't, hang up. So, and there are some other tips. Tips to follow. To avoid these scams, the sweetheart scams, you need to be on your guard, be honest with yourself. You never transfer or wire money to anyone. Keep in touch with your family. Consult a professional for online relationships fishy. Do your homework. Limit the use of social media. Pursue relationships face to face. Also avoid online dating if at possible. Don't feel ashamed and use common sense. There's an old saying. You don't reach for the honey without smoking the hive. And this sweetheart scandal ain't over yet. Coming up on Wednesday, Catherine Cryer has another investigation into this. Very similar to these sweetheart scams. That's on Wednesday. That's all for this edition of Give Me a Break Monday. We will see you again for Give Me a Break Wednesday. Happy Halloween, and for all of us here at Give Me a Break and YouTube. My body, it's your body, your choice. Have a good night, everyone.